I'm Hannah Morgan, 29 years old, and I never thought sitting down to dinner with my own family would feel like stepping into enemy territory. My father swirled his wine with that familiar smirk. My mother scanned the menu like scripture, and my sister leaned close enough to whisper a cutting remark. My boots touched the polished floor with a heavy thud, a reminder of the life they'd mocked. I smiled and said nothing, though the truth sat quietly between us, waiting for the right moment to breathe. In just a few minutes, the balance of this table would change forever, and they had no idea it was coming. Before I go any further, let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you've ever had to stand your ground when someone doubted you. I wasn't always the woman who could make my father choke on his pride. Once I was simply the middle child in a household where success meant high grades, the right clubs, and an eventual seat at an Ivy League ceremony. Caroline, my older sister, fit their definition perfectly. She mastered French by 10th grade, played violin at recitals, and made it to Yale with a letter of praise from her professors. Adam, the youngest, was already groomed for a future in finance, shadowing our father on his trips into the city. And then there was me. I loved animals not in a casual way, but with the kind of devotion that pulled me into barns and fields when other kids were perfecting debate speeches. By the time I turned 12, I knew how to feed and care for piglets, understood pasture rotation, and could tell the difference between grain blends by touch. Weekends that others spent at tennis tournaments or summer camps, I spent mucking stalls and carrying feed buckets taller than my waist. To me, it was honest work that made sense. To my parents, it was a proof that I lacked refinement. My mother once said the smell of hay and animals followed me like a stain, something no amount of soap could cover. The first time I said out loud that I wanted to raise heritage pigs and build a business around them, my father didn't even lower his newspaper. He told me it was dirt disguised as ambition, not a future. Caroline laughed from across the table, tossing out names like Pig Princess Incorporated, as if my dream was a costume party. I stayed quiet, but deep down, I was already planning. I went to college as they demanded, sat through classes that never lit a spark, and counted the days until I could finally choose for myself. The breaking point came quickly. After a semester and a half, I walked into our dining room one evening and told them I was leaving school. My father's hand came down hard on the table, rattling the silverware. My mother stood and walked away without a word, her silence cutting sharper than anger. In that moment, I understood exactly what love meant in our family. It was conditional, and I had just broken the conditions. From that night on, my name was no longer included in holiday cards. No birthday calls ever came, and when my grandmother passed, no one thought to let me know until the funeral had already been held. I was no longer part of the Morgan family story. Still, I had one thing left, the stubborn belief that even from mud, something beautiful could grow. That conviction pushed me to lease 5 acres in Vermont with what little money I had. It wasn't glamorous. A rusted trailer became my home. Secondhand boots became my armor, and 7 half-starved pigs became my only companions. I worked 16-hour days in bitter cold, often crying into the silence at night, yet I never wished myself back at their table. Because as lonely as it was, I knew I had finally chosen a path that was mine alone. I didn't realize it then, but the silence my family forced on me would become the soil where something extraordinary could take root. And before long, the girl they cast aside as foolish would find her first glimpse of a future they never imagined. When I left school, I thought my family's disappointment would fade with time. Instead, their silence grew sharper with every season. The house I grew up in no longer felt like mine. Caroline filled the space with glowing updates about graduate programs and internships overseas, while Adam inherited the quiet encouragements once reserved for me. My place at the table was never spoken of again, as if removing my name from their lives erased the memory of who I had been. It was in that hollow absence that I tried to rebuild. I moved north to Vermont, chasing a dream that everyone else had laughed at. The land I could afford was only 5 acres tucked behind a gravel road that washed out in spring rains and froze solid in winter. I pulled a trailer onto the property, patched the roof with spare tin, and told myself it would be enough. 7 pigs arrived a week later, abandoned from a failing farm. They were thin, cold, and frightened, but so was I. We learned survival together, one day at a time. Those first months blurred into endless work. I woke before sunrise, hauling water in cracked buckets and hammering salvaged boards into pens that never seemed sturdy enough. By nightfall, my hands ached and my back burned, but the pigs still needed more. Their feed cost more than I earned at the farmer's market, and I stretched every dollar until it nearly tore. Some nights I cried from exhaustion, but I never turned back toward Connecticut. I couldn't. The townspeople noticed me quickly. They called me the pig girl when I showed up at the general store buying feed with coins I'd counted twice. The name wasn't meant kindly, and sometimes they shook their heads as though I were chasing something foolish. Even nearby farmers doubted me. They warned that heritage breeds were more trouble than they were worth rooting through pastures until nothing but dirt remained. I listened, nodded, and went home to try again anyway. What they didn't see were the quiet moments that steadied me. Piglets curling into warm hay after a long day, the low hum of contentment that filled the pen when the animals were fed well, the golden light of late afternoons slipping across the fields. Those moments reminded me why I had chosen this life, even when everything else around me suggested I had failed. As the seasons turned, I began to keep a record. At first it was only for myself, scribbled notes about feed mixtures, sketches of pen designs, and recipes I created with whatever I could afford. One evening, out of tired defiance, I borrowed an old camera and filmed a short clip. It showed me pulling smoked bacon from a small barrel smoker, plating it beside eggs from my neighbor's hens and greens I had grown behind the trailer. I uploaded it online and left it there expecting nothing. 3 days later, my world shifted. The video had spread far beyond my tiny town, reaching millions of people who had never heard of me or my pigs. Questions flooded in about the food, the process, and where they could taste it themselves. I answered what I could, surprised that anyone cared. Soon, a food blogger wrote an article, then a local magazine called, and before long I was cooking for strangers who had driven hours just to try a plate of food made in my farmhouse kitchen. The attention startled me, but it also lit a path I hadn't imagined. One evening, a small group of investors arrived after reaching out by email. They sat at mismatched tables beneath hardware store string lights, and I cooked them 6 courses using nothing but my pork and a handful of produce from nearby farms. The meal stretched late into the night, and when it was done they signed papers that would carry me far from that broken-down trailer. From that dinner, the honest pig was born. At first it was only a converted barn, with 12 tables' walls patched with reclaimed wood and chairs borrowed from neighbors. Yet people came anyway. Some waited for hours outside, others brought lawn chairs when seating ran out. They weren't coming for comfort. They came because the food carried a story, and they wanted to be part of it. Each dish I served carried the work I had poured into those early years. Pork chops seared in apple cider tacos made with crispy pig ear and lime cornbread with hot honey alongside house-cured ham. Every bite came from farms I trusted, including my own. Nothing frozen, nothing easy, nothing done by shortcuts. The smoke that drifted from the open kitchen each evening carried more than flavor. It carried proof that mud and labor could be transformed into something people would travel to taste. It wasn't long before food writers began to arrive. A critic from a major magazine called "My Plate's the most honest food in New England." The New York Times followed soon after labeling me the Pig Lady of America. I laughed at the name, but it stuck, and with it came invitations to expand, to grow, to turn what began in a field into something far larger. For a long time, I turned those offers away. I had seen how money with strings could spoil good intentions. But then I met Gloria Bennett, a woman who had built her own bakery business from the ground up. She understood the value of integrity, and she saw in me what I had fought so long to protect. Together we created a partnership. She brought the structure and the reach, and I held on to the vision. With her guidance, The Honest Pig opened its flagship location in Boston. Inside a restored train station with vaulted ceilings and exposed brick, the restaurant became something my parents might have called real dining. Within 2 weeks, it was booked for months. A wait list stretched half a year, and our name appeared in places I had only read about as a child. Still through it all, my family remained silent. To them, I was likely still the daughter who had chosen manure over a future. They had no idea that their own friends were posting photos inside the very restaurant they would soon visit. And when a reservation finally appeared in my inbox, booked under my sister's name for a family celebration, I knew the silence was about to end. They thought they were walking into a new trendy restaurant in the heart of the city. What they didn't know was that they were stepping directly into my world, the world they had once dismissed as worthless. The moment of truth was closer than I had ever imagined, and I was ready to meet it face to face. The email from Caroline arrived on a gray Wednesday morning. The subject line read, "Family dinner to celebrate engagement." I almost deleted it without opening, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside, her words were clipped and formal, with just enough pressure hidden between the lines. 7:30 on Saturday night, flagship location of The Honest Pig. She had somehow managed to secure a reservation despite the long wait list, attaching the confirmation as proof. At the end, one line stood out. "You better show up, Hannah. You owe Mom at least that much." I stared at the message until the screen blurred. My family had no idea they were booking a table at my restaurant, walking straight into the life they had abandoned me to build. For weeks I had dreamed about such a moment, though I never thought it would arrive so plainly in the form of a polite email. I could have asked the manager to cancel inventing an excuse about kitchen renovations or a double booking, but something inside me stopped short of escape. Not revenge, not pride, but readiness. This was no longer about hiding from their judgment. On Saturday, I dressed with quiet care. A denim dress, leather boots still dusted from the farm, and a corduroy jacket I had owned for years. My hair was brushed, but still carried a faint trace of barn air, and I did nothing to hide the scent of hay that lingered on me. When I stepped through the doors, the hostess gave me a knowing smile. "Miss Morgan," she whispered, "shall we seat you now?" I asked her to wait to let me be the last one shown to the table. From the hallway, I could already hear their voices. My mother's clipped tone, my father's practiced hum as he read the wine list aloud, and Caroline's laugh echoing off the brick walls. When I finally walked in, the table stilled for just a moment. Richard looked up, eyes narrowing with the faintest edge of amusement. "You really think you belong here?" he asked, swirling his glass as if the question were rhetorical. Caroline leaned closer to Elaine, her whisper just loud enough for me to catch. "She smells like pig manure." I smiled politely, pulled out the empty chair, and sat down. My boots landed with a dull thud on the hardwood, my hands folded neatly in my lap. "You could have dressed up a little," Elaine murmured behind her champagne flute. "This is my version of formal," I replied, pouring myself water. Richard chuckled. "I hope you can afford dinner. This place isn't cheap." No one asked how I had been. No one offered a simple welcome back. To them, I was still the daughter who had thrown away her future for mud and animals. What they didn't realize was that they had waited 5 weeks for a seat at this very table, 5 weeks to taste dishes I had designed. I let the silence settle, steadying myself as the servers placed appetizers across the table. The plates disappeared quickly. Caroline scraped toppings off the flatbread. Elaine pushed pickled onions to the side, and Richard debated whether the bacon was too thick for modern plating. They critiqued the food without knowing it was mine. I didn't correct them, though. My heart pounded as I waited for what I knew was coming. Moments later, Marcus, our general manager, approached with his usual polished calm. He held a leather folder in his hand and greeted the table with practiced warmth. "Excuse me," he said, "is there a Miss Hannah Morgan here?" Richard's frown deepened. "Why do you ask? Is there a problem?" Marcus ignored him gently and turned to me. "Welcome back, Miss Morgan. Your usual table is ready in the side dining room. Would you like me to bring the investors' wine list now or after your walkthrough?" The words fell into the air like stones. Caroline blinked first. Elaine's hand froze around her fork. Richard choked on his wine, coughing into his napkin as his eyes went wide. "I'm sorry, what he asked?" Marcus remained professional, his gaze steady. "Miss Morgan prefers to dine privately when she visits the flagship. The back room has been held for her. Shall I move this party there?" I set down my glass and shook my head gently. This table is perfect. Their faces were a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "You work here?" Caroline asked slowly. "Managing or something?" "Not quite," I answered. "You know the staff?" Elaine pressed her voice unsteady. "I trained most of them." Richard leaned forward. "Are you saying you're, assistant manager, sous chef?" I folded my hands on the table. "No, Dad. I'm saying I own this restaurant. The Honest Pig is mine. I founded it. I run it, and the food you're eating was designed in my kitchen." The silence that followed was heavier than any I had felt in years. Caroline's brow furrowed. "This can't be serious." "She's joking," Richard said quickly, almost hopeful. But Marcus cleared his throat. "Actually, Sir, Miss Morgan is not only the owner, but the executive chef and founder of our entire restaurant group. This flagship is the centerpiece of our brand." Elaine's pearls shifted as her hand trembled slightly. "The brand," she repeated. I nodded. "We have 7 locations now: Boston, Portland, Chicago, Denver, all built from the same farm you once called a patch of mud." The words landed like cuts across the table. Caroline whispered, "You lied. You let us think you were struggling." "No," I replied softly. "You assumed I was. I just never corrected you." Elaine's voice cracked as she asked, "Why wouldn't you tell us?" I looked at each of them in turn, because I wanted to see who you were when you thought I had nothing. And now I know. Marcus remained by my side, waiting for instruction. "Chef Miranda would like your opinion on the heirloom rib rub before we finalize the spring menu," he said. I stood sliding my chair back with calm precision. "I'll be back shortly," I told them, adjusting my jacket. "Enjoy the entree. It's a braised pork shoulder, my signature." Then I walked away, leaving them stunned in their silence. 15 minutes later, I returned to find the entrees untouched, steam still rising from the plates. They hadn't moved. For the first time in years, uncertainty hung in the air around them. Caroline finally broke the stillness, her voice low. "So it's all true?" I nodded. Richard sat rigid, his eyes searching for something he couldn't find. Elaine adjusted her necklace again, caught between disbelief and dawning realization. The table no longer felt like a battlefield, but neither did it feel like home. It felt like the beginning of a reckoning, one I had waited far too long to face. For several long minutes, no one touched their plates. Steam still rose from the pork shoulder I had crafted its scent, curling through the room like a quiet reminder of the truth they had just heard. Caroline finally broke the silence, her voice strained but measured. "So it's all true." "Every bit of it." I nodded once. Richard sat stiffly, shoulders squared, as if willing himself to find an angle he could control. Elaine adjusted her necklace with trembling hands, a nervous habit she had carried for as long as I could remember. "Yes," I said softly, "from scratch. From the farm you once mocked. From the animals you dismissed as a waste of time." Caroline leaned back in her chair, folding her arms tightly. "You could have called. You didn't have to cut us off like that." I looked directly at her. "I didn't cut you off. You did that the day I said I wanted to raise pigs. You made it clear that my choice made me unworthy of the family you wanted to preserve." Elaine cleared her throat, her voice faltering as she searched for footing. "We were worried, Hannah. You went off alone and it was unusual. We didn't know what you were doing." "You weren't worried," I replied, calm but steady. "You were embarrassed. You told people I was going through something as if it were a phase. You expected me to fail and crawl back asking for help." The words lingered in the air, too sharp to dismiss. Richard leaned forward, his jaw tight. "What matters now is what you've accomplished. Hannah, this restaurant, these locations, your success, it's remarkable. We're proud of what you've built." I kept my gaze steady. "I don't need pride. I need respect. Not the kind that shows up only after a Forbes article or a reservation. The kind that isn't conditional on whether I meet your standards." The conversation wavered after that silence falling heavier than before. Caroline pushed her untouched plate forward, her expression caught between defensiveness and something softer. Richard's eyes darted around the room as if the brick walls might offer him an escape from the weight of the moment. Elaine pressed her napkin flat against her lap, her lips tight with words she didn't seem ready to speak. The air shifted when Marcus returned, leaning quietly toward me. "Chef Cole is finalizing the spring menu. She'd like your opinion before the team locks it in." I stood and excused myself, telling my family to enjoy the entree while it was still warm. The walk to the kitchen steadied me. Inside, Miranda was bent over the pass window, her dark hair tied back as she adjusted a plate of seared loin. She glanced up, one eyebrow arched. "So how's dinner with the royals?" she asked, her tone light but knowing. "They're choking on the truth, more than the food," I said, tasting a sliver of smoked belly. She slid across the counter. We adjusted the seasoning together side by side, just as we had done countless times before. The rhythm of the kitchen soothed me, the clang of pans, the hiss of the grill, the low murmur of cooks moving in sync. Here, everything made sense. After a quarter of an hour, I returned to the table. The plates still sat untouched. Caroline stared at me as though trying to reconcile the sister she thought she knew with the woman standing before her. "You really built all of this?" she asked again, quieter this time. "Yes," I answered, "every part. I worked 3 jobs that first year, slept in a trailer with blisters on my hands, cooked for farmers in the rain just to earn enough for feed. I borrowed when I had to pitch when no one listened, and stretched every dollar until it split. And slowly it became this." Elaine's eyes shone as she leaned forward. "But why didn't you tell us? Why wouldn't you want us to know?" "Because I needed to know who I was without your approval. I wanted to see if what I believed in could stand on its own." No one responded immediately. The only sound was the quiet shuffle of servers moving through the room. Finally, Richard cleared his throat. "Well," he said, forcing steadiness into his voice, "what happens now? Do you intend to cut ties forever? Let this dinner be the last." I looked at him, then at Caroline, then at Elaine. "No," I said slowly, "but from here on, everything changes. If we're going to have a relationship, it has to be on different terms. That means no more jokes about manure, no sideways glances at my boots, no questioning whether I belong in the rooms I enter." Richard shifted in his seat, his face unreadable. "I think we can manage that," "I'm not finished," I said, holding his gaze. The table stilled again. "I don't want investment offers. I don't want favors or invitations just so you can show off your daughter's restaurant. I am not a family trophy now that I've succeeded. I'm the same girl who loved the smell of hay and soil more than silk and champagne, and I'm not going to change for you." Caroline exhaled, her posture softening for the first time all evening. "That's fair," she said quietly, "more than fair." I studied her face, searching for sincerity. "If you'd like," I added, "I could host the rehearsal dinner here, as my gift." Her eyes widened. "You'd do that?" "You're still my sister," I said. "But it would be on my terms." Caroline's lips curved into a smile that didn't feel forced. "Then I'd be honored," she whispered. Across the table, Elaine blinked back tears she tried to disguise as a cough. Richard looked down at his plate, his hands folding the napkin once, then again. For the first time in years, I saw something close to humility on his face. The heaviness at the table began to ease, though it didn't disappear. We sat together a while longer, words coming slower, softer. By the time dessert was served, the room no longer felt like a battlefield, though it was far from familiar ground. It felt like something in between, a beginning of sorts, fragile and uncertain. Later, as the plates were cleared and glasses of cider were placed on the table, Caroline reached for her phone. "I'd like to come by the farm," she said hesitantly. "Not for show, just to see, maybe even to help." "You'll need boots," I replied, a small smile tugging at my lips. She laughed lightly, nodding as though she meant it. And in that moment, with laughter slipping through a space that had been heavy for so long, I knew the next chapter was waiting to be written. The night after the dinner, I stayed at the restaurant long after the last guest left. The kitchen lights had been dimmed, the hum of the refrigerators filling the silence. I leaned against the stainless steel counter, still carrying the weight of the confrontation at the table. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A new message from Caroline lit up the screen. "That was a lot, but thank you. Also, can we talk next week? I'd love to bring someone by the farm." The words startled me more than anything she had said at dinner. Not correction, not mockery, curiosity. I typed back 2 words. "Sure. Boots." That following Saturday, Caroline pulled up the gravel drive in a small sedan. Dust rose behind her as she parked near the barn. She stepped out carefully, her heels sinking slightly into the dirt. "I should have listened," she muttered, glancing down. She popped the trunk and pulled out a pair of borrowed rubber boots, struggling to tug them on over her tights. I couldn't help but smile. I walked her through the pens, the pigs wandering close with soft grunts, curious but unafraid. Caroline held her breath at first, but when one nudged her hand, she laughed despite herself. "They're cleaner than I expected," she admitted. I handed her a bucket of feed, and she carried it awkwardly, spilling some along the way. The animals followed, snorting happily, as though she had been part of their routine for years. Inside the barn, I showed her the spaces I had pieced together with salvaged wood, the feed I measured by hand, the record books I kept with every detail written in neat lines. She traced a finger along one page. "You really did all of this," she said softly. "By yourself." I nodded. For the first time, her words carried no edge of disbelief. We ended the tour in the small garden behind the trailer. Rows of vegetables stretched neatly across the soil, a reminder of where it had all begun. Caroline bent down, touching the leaves of a young basil plant. "This feels real," she whispered, almost to herself. I invited her inside for coffee, and we sat at the small kitchen table where so much of my early planning had taken place. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke and earth, the walls lined with notes and recipes I had scribbled over the years. Caroline looked around with a quiet expression I hadn't seen since we were children. "I told people you'd come crawling back," she confessed. "I was sure you'd give up. I thought I was protecting you from yourself, but I see now I was protecting myself from being wrong." Her honesty surprised me. For years, she had been the one to enforce the family's expectations, but here she was sitting in my kitchen, finally admitting the truth. I didn't press her further. The silence between us wasn't hostile this time. It was steady, reflective, almost forgiving. When she left that evening, she hugged me before climbing back into her car. "I'll be at the rehearsal dinner early," she said with a small smile. "Show me how to feed the pigs properly next time." Then she drove away, leaving the gravel road quiet once more. In the days that followed, I received another message, this time from Elaine. She wanted to meet for lunch, just the two of us. I hesitated before agreeing, unsure what she might say, without the buffer of the rest of the family. We met at a quiet cafe near the waterfront, sunlight slanting across the wooden tables. Elaine arrived wearing her usual pearls, but her hands trembled slightly as she held her menu. For several minutes she made small talk about Adam's new position in finance and Richard's latest business trip. Then her tone shifted. "Hannah," she said carefully, "I don't know if I ever told you, but when you were little you reminded me of my grandmother. She was stubborn, never followed rules, and lived most of her life on a farm. I didn't want that for you. I thought I was pushing you towards something better, but I see now that maybe I was only pushing you away." Her admission caught me off guard. Elaine had never been one to speak openly about her past, nor to admit fault. She reached across the table, her hand brushing mine. "I want to understand more, if you'll let me." I didn't give her an answer right then. Instead, I listened as she asked about the pigs, the restaurants, and the nights I had spent in that trailer. Each question felt awkward, halting, but genuine. For the first time in decades, it seemed like she was trying to know me as I was not as she wished me to be. Later that week, Richard called. His voice carried none of its usual authority. "Hannah," he said, "I owe you an apology. I thought I knew what success meant, and I couldn't see beyond my own definition. I was wrong. I see that now." I listened, waiting, letting his words settle. "I don't expect forgiveness," he continued, "but I'd like the chance to earn back your trust, if you're willing." It was the smallest step, but it was more than I had ever expected from him. I didn't answer immediately. I told him we would talk again. And when I hung up the phone, I realized the distance I had carried for years was finally beginning to shift. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for the following month, and I knew it would test every boundary I had set. My family was willing to step into my world now, but the question lingered, would they respect it, or would old habits return the moment pride was at stake? The weeks after Caroline's visit to the farm passed quickly. Spring was taking hold, and with it came the steady hum of preparation for the rehearsal dinner. Reservations had been blocked, menus refined, and every detail carried the weight of both celebration and scrutiny. I walked the dining room one morning before service, running my hand across the reclaimed pine tables, reminding myself that this had always been more than a restaurant. It was proof that purpose could grow out of soil and sweat. Soon my family would gather here again, but this time, under circumstances neither they nor I could ignore. In the middle of that bustle, my phone rang with Gloria's name on the screen. "You ready for this?" she asked the moment I answered. I could hear the clatter of her bakery kitchen in the background. Rehearsal dinners, family reunions. Those are trickier than any investor meeting. They come with ghosts. I laughed softly. "I'll manage. I've had worse." "Not like this," she said knowingly. "But you've earned it. Don't forget that." Her words stayed with me. Gloria had always seen the line between pride and truth, reminding me to stand firmly in both. She trusted the food to tell its own story, and she trusted me to carry the rest. On the afternoon of the rehearsal dinner, I arrived hours before the others. The kitchen was alive with movement, saucepans, bubbling herbs being chopped, the slow rhythm of bread rising in the oven. Miranda lifted her head from the pass window when I entered. "We'll run it like any other night," she said. "No special treatment, no shortcuts. They eat what every guest eats." "That's the plan," I replied. As the sun slipped lower, the first guests began to arrive. Caroline entered with her fiancé, a tall man named David, whom I'd met only once. She greeted me warmly as though the weeks between our last conversation and this moment had settled into something steady. Elaine followed close behind, her pearls in place, but her eyes softer than I remembered. Richard was last, his step slower, his gaze moving over the space with reluctant recognition. The rehearsal dinner unfolded quietly at first. Guests' toasted servers moved swiftly, and the dishes left the kitchen one by one. I watched from the edges, stepping in when asked, answering questions about recipes and sourcing. To my surprise, Richard approached during the second course. He held his glass loosely, as though the weight of it pressed into his hand. "This is excellent," he said simply, his voice lower than usual. "You've done something remarkable here." I studied him carefully, waiting for the familiar tone of condescension, but it never came. "Thank you," I answered. "It took years." His gaze lingered on the plates moving past. "I didn't understand before. I see it now." He hesitated, the pause stretching longer than I expected. "I'm sorry, Hannah." The words didn't erase the years between us, but they settled into a place I hadn't thought possible. I nodded once, and we left it there. Later in the evening, Caroline raised her glass for a toast. To family, she said, her voice carrying across the room. To the kind of family that learns even if it takes longer than it should. And to my sister, who built something we're finally proud to be part of. Her words brought a quiet stillness to the table. Elaine dabbed her eyes. Richard lowered his head, and for the first time since childhood, I felt the air around us shift towards something that resembled acceptance. As dessert was served, Caroline leaned close. "When the wedding's done, I'd like to spend more time at the farm. Not just to visit, maybe to help. David, too, he wants to learn." I smiled faintly. "We'll see how you handle early mornings." She laughed, and it wasn't forced. By the end of the night, as guests filtered out into the cool spring air, I remained in the doorway watching my family leave together. Richard turned once, meeting my eyes, and gave the smallest nod before following Elaine to the car. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was no longer silence. Back inside, Miranda stacked plates while the last of the staff wiped down counters. So she asked, tilting her head toward me. "They stayed," I said, "and that's more than I expected." She smiled knowingly. "Sometimes that's enough to start." As the restaurant lights dimmed, I realized the shift was no longer about winning their approval. It was about standing in the place I had built, knowing it didn't depend on them anymore. And yet, for the first time, they seemed willing to meet me there. The morning of Caroline's wedding dawned, clear sunlight spilling across the fields as I fed the pigs before driving into the city. The rehearsal dinner had ended without fireworks, but the wedding itself carried a different weight. Guests would be watching cameras flashing, and my family would once again step into the world I had built. This time, I was no longer the forgotten daughter in the background. I was the host, the one responsible for every plate served that evening. When I arrived at the restaurant, the staff was already in motion. White tablecloths stretched across the long tables, candles lined the windowsills, and trays of appetizers waited on chilled platters. Miranda caught my eye from across the kitchen, lifting her chin in a silent question. "We're ready," I told her, "just like we practiced." By late afternoon, the wedding party began to arrive. Caroline stepped in first, her dress a simple ivory that suited her, her face bright with both nerves and joy. David held her hand, steadying her as guests filtered in behind them. Elaine and Richard followed their posture quieter than usual, as if they were aware that all eyes no longer turned to them first. The ceremony itself was held in a nearby hall, but the reception belonged to the honest pig. As the guests settled, servers moved gracefully between tables, placing small plates of cider-braised pork and cornbread with honey butter. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses filled the room, a hum of warmth that carried more than I expected. Halfway through the evening, Richard stood. He held his glass of wine with a hand that trembled slightly. Tonight, he began, his voice catching. I want to speak not only as the father of the bride, but as the father of a family that has had to learn. I have been slow to understand, slower still to admit when I was wrong. But tonight I want to say clearly, Hannah, what you've built is extraordinary. You carried yourself when we would not carry you, and I am proud to call you my daughter. The room hushed. Caroline squeezed David's hand. Elaine pressed her napkin to her eyes, and even the guests seemed to hold their breath. For years, I had waited for words that never came. Now, in front of friends, extended relatives, and strangers alike, Richard gave them freely. I raised my glass in return, keeping my voice steady. Thank you. What matters to me is respect, the kind that doesn't depend on success or failure. If tonight is the beginning of that, then I'll accept it. The toast ended and the music began. Guests rose to dance, Caroline spinning in David's arms, while laughter filled the air. Elaine found me near the kitchen doors a short while later. You've changed everything, she whispered. Not just for us, for all of us. She reached for my hand, her grip firmer than I expected. I don't want to lose this chance again. For a long time, I stood there watching my family move through the space I had built. Caroline and David laughed near the dance floor. Richard spoke quietly with Adam at the bar, and Elaine lingered close, her eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. The distance that once felt like a canyon now felt like something bridgeable, fragile, but real. As the evening wound down, Caroline approached me with a smile that reached her eyes. This was perfect, she said. Thank you for giving us this night. I'll never forget it. You gave me something too, I replied, a chance to see that maybe we can begin again. The candles burned low, the last of the plates cleared, and guests departed into the night. When the doors finally closed and the staff began their final sweep, I walked through the empty dining room one last time. The wood tables gleamed under the soft light, the air carrying the faint scent of smoke and cider. It felt like closure, but it also felt like something new. I paused by the doorway, glancing back at the space that had witnessed both rejection and reconciliation. For years I had built this world without them. Tonight, for the first time, they stepped into it and chose to stay. When the last of the wedding guests had gone and the dining room sat empty again, I lingered in the quiet. The candles were still burning low, their flames trembling in the draft from the doorway. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke and cider, and the tables gleamed as if waiting for the next story to unfold. For the first time in years, I felt no need to brace myself against my family's words. They had seen me, not the version they invented, not the daughter they dismissed, but the woman who had taken mud and labor and turned it into something lasting. Richard's toast, Elaine's hand in mine, Caroline's laughter. All of it reminded me that while love had been conditional, once respect was now beginning to grow in its place. I walked back toward the kitchen where Miranda was wiping down the counters. She looked up, her tired smile matching my own. "You did it," she said simply. I nodded, because nothing more needed to be said. Gloria had once told me that real success wasn't measured in applause, but in peace, and I finally understood what she meant. Later that night, I drove home to the farm. The gravel road crunched beneath the tires, the fields stretched wide under a quiet sky, and the pigs stirred as I stepped out to check them. Their steady grunts carried across the dark, a sound more comforting than any applause. I leaned against the fence, watching the stars scatter above me, brighter here than anywhere else. I thought about the years I had spent erased from holiday cards, excluded from birthdays, and left to wonder if I was worth remembering. I thought about the long nights in a trailer working through blisters and doubt. And I thought about the woman who had walked into her own restaurant boots still dusty, finally unafraid. What I learned is this dignity isn't given when others decide you've earned it. It's built one choice at a time, one hard day after another, until it belongs to you completely. Justice doesn't always come as revenge. It comes as freedom, as peace, as the quiet knowledge that you no longer need permission to stand tall in your own life. I closed the barn gate, the night air cool against my skin, and carried that truth with me. My family and I had started something fragile, and whether it grew or not, I knew I would never go back to being silent. And if you're listening now, I hope you carry that with you too. Respect is never conditional, and worth is never defined by someone else's standards. Tell me in the comments, when was the moment you realized you no longer needed approval to live your own truth?